Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Harvard Extension School Creative Writing and Literature Student Society, our author spotlight with our very own alumni, Laurie Dove. Yay!
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you here and get to know a little bit more about your journey, some VIP access into Laura's brain.
Right. That's right.
Yes. So, for those of you who have not seen her lovely debut, right here, the cover, and it is hardcover. Yes, we love that. It also has a vanishing act because of my background, but you can see it above Laurie's head.
Yes, here we have it as well. I can also do
Ah,
I'm getting better at this.
perfect. So I'm just going to begin with reading the little blurb in the back on the flap, and then Laurie will take it away from there. So, Laurie L. Dove is a reporter and editor whose work has appeared in numerous publications and who has garnered several honors for outstanding journalism. She graduated with a master's degree in creative writing and literature, represent, from Harvard University. She is an adjunct professor who currently lives and writes in Kansas. So please, Laurie, tell us more about you. And yeah, just take it away.
All right. Well, first, thank you for having me. It is such a thrill to be here because I love my HES people. I came away from this program with lifelong friends, with all of these professors and instructors that I admire, and really this whole network of writing people, which what is better than that? We can talk about books, we can read books, we can study craft, we can do all of those wonderful things together. So I have never felt such a sense of community as I did when I became part of HES. And I was 50 when I graduated, when I went to commencement. And I felt walking onto campus that I was stepping fully into my life. Like all of the parts of myself had integrated at that time. And I'm still carrying that with me. So it was just a fantastic experience. So I'm glad we're all staying in touch. I started this book as a short story in a suspense class, a Chris Mooney suspense class. And we were writing short stories, yes. And he said, write the ending first. And so I did. And when I wrote the ending, the character that is the main character in this book, like came into my head. Like I knew this scene so clearly. And once I had written the short story, I thought, oh, there's a lot to this character. I could spend a lot of time with this character. So I kind of deconstructed it and it became this loose framework for the novel. So I basically had kind of a beginning, middle, and an end. And the end that I wrote for that short story is still the end in the book. It is just a little bit changed, but not very much. So it really did come out of that class. And I wanted to be a writer always. I was an early reader. I was an early writer. This is probably a familiar story to a lot of you. You've probably had similar experiences where you've just fallen in love with what you're doing. And instead, I became a journalist. And I really found a lot of meaning in that. I was a journalist from the time I got out of undergrad, all of these years. And it felt like important work to tell other people's stories. And I found that I really enjoyed that aspect of it because it felt in some way like I was making a difference. And then as I was writing this book, which was the dream all along to write fiction, I found that a lot of those things that I developed along the way, I was also the mayor of my town. I come from a community that has a lot of interest in social justice issues. And then I have this reporting background. And I have all of these daughters that I feel really protective of, like a lot of parents do. And they were at ages that they were all going out into the big wide world. And they're fully capable human beings, but it was very helpful for me to be able to like kind of channel all of my worry into this fictional book. Oh, hello. I'm glad you're here. I was just telling everyone about the incredible conversations we had when I was working on my thesis with you, and I still think about it to this day. It was fantastic. So I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm so happy to hear and congratulations. Oh my God, this is
Thank
amazing.
you. Thank you. It's just been a dream. I was just explaining how this book got its start as a short story in my suspense class there. And then it just kind of took on a life of its own. And the other thing that happened was really this journey of faith in yourself and in the work you're doing, because I finished the book about the time the program was over. I went to commencement in May of 2020. Nope, that's not right. 22. But 6 months before that, I had seen, just as my classes were wrapping up, this notice from Berkeley, an imprint of Penguin Random House, for unagented submissions. And I was querying agents at the time, and which is a long process. And I had everything ready because I'd been prepared in the program, right? I had a query letter, I had a pitch, I had my synopsis, I had my first 10 pages ready to go. I had all of that. So I quick dashed off their requirements for that. And that was December of 2021. So then I went to commencement, had the time of my life, continued to query agents. And then I entered this very kind of emotionally volatile period as a writer that I'd never experienced before, where like, oh, I hope someone, I hope I get this book. I hope it means something. I hope it matters. And all this time, as I'm querying agents, and I think some of my friends, yes, I see Jen is here and Christine is here, and maybe some others are too that I'm not seeing. And every Sunday I'd go to our writers group and we'd all talk about these things, you know. And I'm like, I'm not really a crier, but you know, what's I've got so much invested in this. But my goal was, no matter what, I was just going to keep writing books because that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I thought, well, if I don't get an agent for this one, I probably had a certain number of agents I was going to query before I set it aside and focused on another one. But I thought, I'm just going to keep writing books because something's going to stick, right? Like eventually something's going to stick. And all of this up and down process is happening with me. And in 2023, the spring of 2023, I got a response from that December 2021 query for an unagented submission. So when we talk about it takes a while, it does take a while. And just being faithful to your craft and to yourself and to your dream, whatever that dream is for you, hold tight to that, because it can happen. And in fact, it may be happening in the background while you're wasting all of that emotional energy wondering what's going to become of your book. So they asked for a full, I provided that. That was about the time I started to get a little suspicious that I didn't really understand what was happening, because I saw in their email it said acquisitions. And I thought, oh, I think I skipped a step, and I had kind of forgotten that I'd even done this in the first place. So we had these lovely conversations. And after about 2 weeks, they said, well, we'd like to make an offer. And they had to just really spell it out for me because I was so, you know, keeping my hopes so, let's just say, low, that I wanted to have these conversations with them, but not be presumptive that something specific was going to happen. They said, well, we'd like to make you an offer. They had to spell it out. And I was like, oh, and they said, do you have an agent? And I said, and in my mind was just rolling these lists of queries that I'd sent out and never heard back. And I said, well, I have a short list. And they said, okay, well, why don't you reach out to your short list and get back with us? And here I have this offer, and I'm kind of panicking because I think, okay, I've had a few agents get back to me, but I know it's this months long process. Like, you know, how is this timing going to work out? And I said, okay, well, I will do that, but I'm not sure how quickly they'll get back with me. And everyone laughed that was on the call. And they said, no, no, just reach out, tell them you have an offer from us. It'll be fine. And I was like, okay. I was still a little like, oh, I hope this works out. So I needed to pick my daughter up from school. So I called my husband at work real quick, and he reads all kinds of books in this genre, basically. And I said, quick, look in the acknowledgments and see who everybody's agent is of your favorite authors. And then we just picked a couple of people also off the New York Times bestseller list. And so I sent out 5 emails. Now, the other thing that y'all probably know from querying is you have to go through a process, right? Like there's a software interface between you and the agents that you're querying usually, and there's not a lot of direct contact. But it was a good thing I was a journalist, so I did my research very quickly, and I found all of their emails and I emailed them. And I went to pick my daughter up from school, and I thought, okay, now the waiting starts. Like, I really hope this timing works out. I think it was a Thursday afternoon when all of this happened. And I got back 15 minutes later, and I had replies from all but one. We had phone calls then that afternoon, and I found an agent that I really aligned with. And the offer was made the next day through my agent, and it all came together very, very quickly. So I had heard people say that it's a lot of waiting, and then things can happen very quickly, and then waiting and things happening very quickly. And I can attest that that's true. And it's also a lot of fun that way. So I highly recommend it. And then I became a published author. That's my behind the scenes.
Wow, I feel like we just went on that ride with you. Like, if you could have seen my face, I was like, like,
that is what it was like. Yes. Ultimately, it's been a joy because this is my biggest dream. And then what happens when that comes true? Then that's an entirely other process, because I wanted this so badly. And not just that I wanted it, but I wanted to put into the world the best art that I could create. And so that process of revision and those kind of things, I loved that process because I felt like it was an opportunity for me to be able to improve this story that I knew even when I submitted the full, there were things that I still wanted to change about it. And I didn't want to put anything out in the world that wasn't as good as I could make it. And my goal and my hope is that I'll just continue to improve both in my process and then in what the outcome is as I continue to write.
that's incredible. So did your agent, was they also your editor, or did they put you up with an editor? How did that go?
Oh, yes. So the acquisitions team that got in touch with me from Berkeley, they were my editors, and they pulled this book out of 5,500 submissions in this unagented window. It was only open for 10 days. They'd never done it before. And yeah, so they pulled my book out of that. There were 3 other books that were chosen. Mine was the last one that they found in the stack, and it has developed into this lovely, lovely relationship. I have heard things when I was an aspiring author about how awful it can be, and I had none of that for my experience. Every single part of this has been such a joy that um, I I can firmly counteract all of those negative things that I had once heard about this.
That is such a relief, and that gives us all hope, because I think we're all tired of hearing a lot of horror stories. I think it's good to
Yeah.
hear some positive feedback and good experiences from the get-go. So in that 2-year waiting period where you were like starting to give up hope and then you got the email, at any point did you consider self-publishing?
Yes, that's a great question. And I would say, like, I was very up and down, but the other thing I was determined not to stop. And I think that that's a really key ingredient for everyone who does what we do, is the commitment to yourself, because that's really what it is. It's a commitment to yourself and your art and what you want to create. And you're creating it for yourself first. When I started writing this, I didn't even know what kind of book it was. I've since learned that's probably a marketing decision anyway. So I don't really have to worry about that. I just have to write the book that I'd like to see in the world. I was going to answer your question.
Which also happens a lot for creative brains. But you're right. Every book has a home. Your job is just to write the book, and then they will take care of putting it where it goes. That's great. So walk me through your timeline again. So before you started with HES or Harvard Extension School, you didn't have any type of draft or novel that you're working on, even if it wasn't this one, like something else that wasn't journalism?
Well, I had started novels over the years, and I would kind of get to the middle, and it would get complicated, and other more pressing needs would come up. I'd get a paying assignment or a different thing, and it would always get pushed to the end of the list, which is really why I wanted the master's program in the first place, because I knew I needed some structure and I needed some time that was really dedicated to this if I was finally going to turn that corner and really work on it like it was a career. And so that's the space and really the development that the program gave me in order to do that.
That's awesome. So how long did your program last? Because you said you graduated 2020, but when did you start?
I started with one class, I think in 2018.
Okay.
And then I just kind of took another class and I thought, well, we'll just see, and then I really grew to, from the first class that I went to, really looked forward to it. And like, this was so satisfying and rewarding and exactly what I wanted to be doing with the people that I wanted to be doing it with, that I was just all in, all in.
That's awesome. Oh, I remember the question now that we both forgot.
Oh, thank you.
It was, oh, you'll see that. Dan, can we edit that? So it was, did you ever consider self-publishing during that too?
Oh, yes, thank you for that. I did. In fact, I did a lot of research on that and started gathering resources, because along the way, years ago, I owned a publishing company. We had some magazines that we did and some weekly newspaper and things like that. And wasn't super excited though about doing it myself, because I also understood the time commitment that that takes for all of the other aspects of running that kind of business. But that said, I did meet people who are incredibly successful at it. And I think that it is this, there are wonderful things about it, just as we've had kind of this explosion of other points of view and meeting people and hearing their stories on social media. It's been an equalizer in a lot of ways. Self-publishing, I think, is as well. And so I think that writing the book is the accomplishment, and how you take it to market, well, that's another decision entirely. I think every book is a marvel.
Yeah. Do you remember if when you submitted the 10-day Penguin House submission, if it said that you were not allowed to submit it anywhere else for the time being? Or like, do you think they would have taken your book even if you had self-published?
I That's a great question, and it's probably not a question I can answer. I don't recall any information like that, but I am not sure about the other answer to that. I think they'd have to answer that.
Oh, okay. But they did require that you had an agent once they did choose you.
They didn't require. I said, well, I could. I knew an entertainment lawyer, and I was like, well, I can have somebody look at the contract, and they were like, no, we think you'll want an agent, and they were right. Like it's your agent is really your advocate, although I feel like also my editors at Berkeley are also my advocates. So it's this really these really beautiful relationships all around.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely more fun too, like how you said, to have a whole team helping you out,
Yes.
rather than you having to wear all the hats, and you don't get to enjoy the publication as much. It's more like work, right?
Yes, that's right. And I had done pieces of the other aspects of it, you know, marketing, the publishing, the business aspect of it. And to be able to focus on this part of it, on the writing part of it, was really a joy.
Yeah, I bet. How long was it in the editing process with like the Berkeley people that they helped you?
I would say about a year,
Okay.
about a year. And there's downtime in there. But really, what it allowed me to do was create the book that I wanted. And I was close to being able to do that when I submitted it. But there were things that I couldn't quite put my finger on that were bothering me. There were things that I knew I wanted to change, but there is nothing like a really skilled developmental editor in your corner to really bring some things into focus. And when I got my first round of developmental edits back, I relied on some feedback that I'd gotten in a short story class. And I got this short story back. I think it was probably my first class where I wrote a short story. And there was a dog in my story, and it didn't factor very prominently. But the feedback that I got from the professor was more dog. And I was like, oh, and I kind of puzzled over that, right? And kind of worked on it. But the changes I made were just kind of tweaks. It wasn't, I didn't really take anything apart, and that reflected in my final grade when I after I did send that revised piece in, and I was like, oh. And so I spent the next few years like thinking, more dog, more dog. If you could have just seen a thought bubble above my head, it would have just said more dog. It's all the time. Then I get the developmental edits back for this, and I'm looking at them, and they weren't prescriptive in any way. They were just, you know, as a reader, you know, some feedback on that, maybe a suggestion here and there. And I looked at it, and I kind of have to sneak up on things like that. So I kind of looked at it and I set it aside for a couple of days and just thought, and in my head is still more dog, more dog. And then it hit me. I'm like, oh, more dog. I got I got the edits. I took it completely apart and I wrote the story I really wanted it to be. And that I think was such a breakthrough for me to finally understand what that meant. You know, that ownership. Don't be afraid to really don't be so precious about it that you can't go in and really take it apart to make it a better thing.
Wow, that's I'm never gonna like stop picturing that now. Whenever I'm having doubts, and just be like, more
Right.
dog, Natalie, more dog.
That's right, more dog.
That's awesome. That's a really good tip, I think, because especially once you're near the polishing stages, you feel like it's so fragile that if you add a character, remove a character, tweak one thing from the beginning, it's going to be a domino or butterfly effect, and it's going to ruin everything and start all over. Or at least that's my fear. So it's really helpful to hear that coming from someone who did it.
Yes, and that is how it feels. That's a great way to describe it. It also felt that way for me. So it's made me I'm actually writing the second, I'm editing the second book right now. And I tell myself probably every day, more dog. Like now it's a battle cry. Like it makes me go into my own work and, you know, tear it up a little. So
Oh my gosh. Okay, are you allowed to tell us a little bit about the second book?
Well, I can tell you that I have two more books coming with Berkeley. They are so fantastic, and I am feeling really fortunate to work with them. And I'm excited to have two more books with them. I'm finishing up the second one now. We will have Star in this book as well. They really fell in love with the character more than probably the story itself. And that kind of surprised me too. So I'll just share that real quick because I knew the story needed improvement, but they saw past that and really liked this character. And really, from our first conversations, asked, well, how do you see this? You know, do you see this as a series and those kind of things?
That is
So now it is.
ah, wait, this is so exciting. Um, okay, I just got so excited. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So, is this something you weren't planning it to be a series, right? So, how is the like pressure or deadlines coming from editors? Because it's so different when you have 4 to 5 years to write your one novel, right? But once you have
Yes.
agents and editors, it's a team and they're waiting on you. What was that like?
Well, the minute I got the deal, I went back to one of my professors and I said, oh, you know, it happened. And they were so excited for me, but they gave me really good advice, which was they'll probably want a book a year. Start writing the next one now. And I did. So I've actually been working on it from the time I had the first book deal. And I had already had some ideas I'd kind of toyed around with. What takes me the longest is thinking through the book. Writing it, I can do pretty quickly, but making the decisions at each turn in the story is what takes me so long because you're right. It's like dominoes. If I go in this direction, things fall this way. If I go in this direction, they fall this way. So I do a lot of thought auditions in my mind when I'm trying to figure out what direction could this potentially go in because I could sit and write all day long. I'm a fast writer. I can write about 1,000 words an hour. So once I know where I'm going, but if I'm just doing those thought auditions on paper, then I've got just loads and loads of stuff to work with. And, you know, what am I going to do with it? It's not all going to fit. So it's really worked for me to kind of think it through first and then write it.
That's great. And that had me thinking too how you were surprised that they cared more about the character than the actual plot or the storyline. Um,
Yeah.
maybe that's what made it easier. I don't know, I'm just spitballing because I feel like when a character is so
Mhm.
well developed and they feel so real, they feel like a real person, like your friend,
Mhm.
you could put them anywhere and something will
Yes.
happen because it's
Yeah.
like a human. Like we just go through life and I could have a really exciting day tomorrow and turn that into a story, you know? So it's just it seems like that really worked out for you and you weren't even doing that intentionally.
That is a wonderful way to put it. That is how I feel about this character, where there are really endless possibilities with her. And she has a lot of growth in her future because when we meet her in this book, she's really at she's at rock bottom. And we see her really mired in grief and she finds herself on it's a fictional reservation in Oklahoma, right over the Kansas state line, where her father was raised. But he had never gone back as an adult. And to her knowledge, she'd never been there. She knows nothing of her culture because it wasn't really talked about in her home in Chicago, where she was raised and where she worked as a police detective. And so after her daughter died, she just really went mad with grief. And so she was asked to leave and probably grateful to get away. And so she finds herself as a tribal marshal, the first kind of policing presence that has been on this reservation in many years because of this grant from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And all of the complications that come with that in this traumatic history between the federal government and these tribal nations. And also, she finds herself almost immediately embroiled in the search for a missing college woman from the reservation. And so it has all of these aspects that really just coalesce in her story almost immediately.
Incredible. Um, who, if you don't mind, I don't know if this is a personal question or not, but who or what was your inspiration for this story? Because I know this has to do with your cultural background as well.
Yes, so I was adopted as an infant and I was raised by a Mennonite family. And we knew from the beginning that I had an Indigenous heritage. And my parents were always shared that with me. It was a closed adoption, so they shared always what they knew. And I always knew I was adopted. And it was this wonderful way to grow up, but also this heritage that while we were all aware of and it was celebrated in my family, I didn't have cultural knowledge of it. And it was important to me to really approach this through the lens of an outsider, through my character, because that's what I am. I am an outsider to this culture. And so it wouldn't be appropriate or possible for me to even begin to get it right unless I wrote from an outside perspective. So we have that a similar circumstance with this main character. And I also worked with an authenticity reader who has that lived experience. And that was a really important step for me. I not only welcomed that, but I was very grateful for it because that was really valuable insight to me. And I was pleased to find that there weren't really any big changes. It was more an approval uh, from that authenticity reader, but I needed that, and I found that that was really helpful, and that it really justified for me that the research that I'd done and the things that I'd paid attention to were right enough for this book.
That must have been a very therapeutic and special moment for you. It's almost like you get to find yourself through this character and through the process. And that's really unique. That's why I love literature. You just never know what kind of gems you're going to get out of it.
I do too. And I like to say, I like to write long enough that it surprises me, or write this character long enough that the character surprises me. But what surprised me coming out of this book were all of the ways that it brought together these parts of my life. The Mennonite community I'm in has always been concerned with social justice issues. And then we have that really brought to my attention as I was researching the book, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the shocking statistics that bears out what a crisis that is. And so we have that come together in the book. I'm really interested in naturalist and biology types of things. And so I was researching an endangered species for this, and that was really fascinating to me. And then we have all of these like latent fears about raising daughters that came out in the book as well. So it's interesting. It's kind of like a snapshot of my life at that time, even though it's not about me at all. And I'm not really reflected in any of the characters. Behind the scenes, you can kind of see all of these things merging.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's like it's a made up character, but you can see how you connect with it, and it's
Yeah.
almost happens on its own, which is something that we often like to debate or question here, put it up to a poll really is, did you ever experience where your character just wrote itself? Because a lot of people say, the saying's like, oh, just let your character write, let them be. It's almost like letting your children grow up. Did you experience that?
Yes, I'm kind of waiting for that magical moment where like my character writes themselves. I it hasn't happened to me yet, maybe someday. But the one thing that did happen, I know my character now. And you aren't I think I'm not going to know my character right away, but by about 100 pages, oh, I know my character and I know what they're going to do or what they aren't. And when I know that, sometimes they do follow that path, but sometimes it's fun to have them do the opposite of what I think they're going to do because I know them. So it's really interesting to be able to play with or exploit those differences that can come up in the narrative.
That's wonderful. I love that. I love those types of stories. I do want to get some other people's questions, like let people chime in, comments. Also, if you did want to talk a little bit about your experience with Collier Brown, and if Collier Brown wanted to chime in, you're more than welcome, but also no pressure. So yeah, just chime in if you have questions, comments, anyone?
Should I type it or
No,
can
we
I
want to
ask?
hear your voice, please.
Oh, well, I have two, Lori. One of them I feel like you might have said, and I just missed it coming in late, and it's more of a procedural one that you like the things you were talking about earlier. I always get students who ask about how much material are you sending to a particular agent? What in an email, for example, is too much, too little, right? What are they legitimately going to look at? And um, I'll hand that over to you, and then I have a question about the dear woman itself.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll answer the first one, and that is from the summer residency that I went to. I was very prepared because I had this query letter that would workshopped like everyone else did in class, and because I'd worked on this novel, worked on this novel in as many different classes as I could. I kind of kept coming back to it, different sections of it, and I really found that being able to do those kinds of things had me prepared. But they want a full manuscript before you start querying, and I understand that. That makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense to be prepared with that because you may get an answer back right away. You never know when you will that says yes. Let me read the whole manuscript. But if you have a tight 10 pages, sometimes it'll be 5, sometimes it'll be 20, but if you have that prepared, I just had different lengths of documents that I had ready to go. I had a pitch, which is really what I'd put in the body of an email, and then I had a query letter, which was the longer full pitch, and then I also had a synopsis, which are for me notoriously difficult to write, like condensing an entire story down into like 4 paragraphs. There's an art to it. I even had log lines. So I had a playlist. Like if they asked what the playlist would have been for this book, I had it ready. Like I was prepared. And so it was really good to have all of those things ready. And I would recommend it because then as you're doing the work and reaching out about your book and you're getting requests back, or you have to kind of research, well, what does this agent want specifically, and that in itself takes time. So I had everything ready. I could just kind of pick and choose what needed to be attached to whatever that submission was.
That's super helpful. That's so helpful. It makes so much sense just to have a portfolio of ready-made, ready to go
Mm-hmm.
items to send out. I'm wondering too just about the trope of the dear woman. I'm one,
Mm-hmm.
again, my apologies if you started talking about this earlier, but when did you first learn, right, um about the cultural importance, right, of that particular story for Indigenous peoples? And I think me even more importantly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the ongoing relevance in the obviously into the 21st century, but the way that you're thinking about it, for your own fiction.
That's a great question. I cannot recall when I first came across Dear Woman, except it was probably in some of the literature that I was reading. And what I really was focused on, though, is I wanted to inject magical realism into the book because I'm such a fan of it. I love the ambiguity that it introduces because life is like that. We don't have all the answers. There are things that happen that we don't understand. And I like the interplay between this could be kind of a supernatural or mythological being, or it could have an explanation. It could equally be either of those things, because as a journalist, I found in sourcing and interviewing and doing all of the research and the interviews that I did, the truth was often more than one story. The truth could be contained in multiple stories. And that's really what I found in Dear Woman. I found, this being that has existed for many cultures, in many different places, long before I ever came along and long after I'll be gone. But in this, it really echoed the theme of the book, which was this damage, this risk, this many deaths that Indigenous women experienced because for many reasons, part of that marginalization, part of that gaps in jurisdictional issues and mandatory reporting and all of those kinds of things. And it's, I think, the third leading cause of death in Oklahoma for women right now. And it is pretty shocking, the statistics themselves. There's about 5,500, 600 women who are currently Indigenous women in the United States, just the contiguous United States, who are currently missing. And that's in one federal database. Another federal database has the number about 300. So you can see this huge conflict between even what we think we might know. And the truth is, because of all of these ways that these cases are falling through the cracks, the number is actually much, much higher. We don't even know the full number. And so as I was discovering that, I was really discovering in this mythological being all of these ways that this real life crisis echoed in this. And it gave me another way to talk about it that wasn't a statistic, that wasn't so grounded in reality, but that let me explore that in a different way. So my hope was that I could explore the treatment of women in multiple layers throughout the book.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
It's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
I have a question. I just read John McPhee's article in the New Yorker, draft number 4, where he's talking about how it's really a slog until you get to the 4th draft, and then the writing process can become pleasant. So I'm curious about your process in terms of how many drafts did you go through, and what was that experience of getting it from, you mentioned it started as a short story, so getting it from that short story to obviously what it's become.
Yes, well, I learned what I need to, it helped me identify my growth areas, because I knew from the outset that I was not strong at plotting, because that wasn't where this book came from. It kind of grew from a character perspective, but that's okay. Like, everyone will have things that they're more naturally inclined to be able to do. But if you can identify those other things, there are all of these resources that you can do to help yourself improve in that way. And so that's really what I did. I had probably just a couple of drafts of the full novel before I sent it out and it was picked up. But one of those drafts was really going back and reverse outlining it so that I could identify a structure. And then I moved some things around and added a couple of things so that my structure had improved, where things happen where a reader might maybe not expect them to happen. That's not what I'm trying to say, but where it feels right. Because we're all readers, and you know when something feels right in a story. And that was really what I did in that second draft.
Awesome, thank you.
What would you say was the most beneficial class that you took at Harvard that got you to where to get your book out there?
Oh, that is a really great question. I took something different from all of them, but I also feel like you get out of things what you put into them. And I really tried to put maximum effort in. When we would get a reading list before a class, I would get all the books and read everything in the book, even if we were only reading one or two short stories out of it. I really studied it because one, I enjoyed it. That's just what I like to do. But it really reinforced to me that idea that the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. So there were things from different classes that were really helpful in different ways. One of the things, though, that was immensely helpful was in Chris Mooney's class that he taught a suspense class. And I have to tell you, when I took the class, I did not think that I'd never written suspense. It really had never occurred to me to try to write suspense. And what did you know? Then I wrote a suspense book. I'm like, what? Well, life is funny. Life is funny. But what was really helpful about that class was when he started writing, he said that he took this book, he took Silence, you can see all my, so he took Silence of the Lambs and he deconstructed it. He looked for, I think would probably call them beats. I'm not sure that's what he called it. But, you know, if you just look at the first few pages of that, the opening of the book, we have all of this movement from the character where she's coming from being outside into inside into this meeting that's unexpected. But what it does, it takes us cinematically through that entire environment, through her. It gives us context. And when I realized, oh, I can look at these books that feel like magic, and I can in some way pull that curtain back and understand the craft at work, that really opened things for me. And it made me read differently. And it was really helpful to me. I find that, so I read widely, I read all kinds of things. And I try not to read anything close at all to what I'm writing at the time. But what I find is when I'm reading outside, very far away from what I might be writing, there's always something in there that triggers in me a solution of how to do something that I'm struggling with. And so it taught me to be a reader who wants to be a writer, I think.
Hi, Lori.
Hi.
So I want to tell you that when I was considering whether or not to do the Harvard Extension School, I saw your little blurb on their website from like 2023, and you just like the way you experienced your the classes, the way you described it was so happy and excited. That was what like part of what convinced me to do the program. So
I love that. That makes me so happy. I'm so glad you're here and experiencing it. Oh, thank you for telling me that.
yeah, no, like you just sounded like you had such a great time, and I was like, I want that. So
Yeah.
you were part of my decision to come here, and now
Oh,
I'm you. That's so cool.
full circle. I love it.
And I did have a question. Do you like, like, do you feel afraid, like thinking like I'm gonna put my book out there for the whole wide world to see, and and people can comment whatever they want on it? Is it like it's like really scary for me to think about that, even though I want to be an author? And like, how do you deal with that?
That is such a good question because I have, in some ways, struggled with that in ways that I didn't expect. As a reporter and a journalist, I was used to putting my work out there. I'd write it and forget about it. It was out there, but fiction is so inherently personal that there are these moments where when you're writing it, you need to be very personal in how you're doing it, right? Your heart's in this work, that that's what makes it special, because only you can write this story because of your experiences, the way you see the world, the all of these things that come together for you. And so that personal nature of it is feels very vulnerable. And for me, that moment came when, so I mentioned I'm adopted and I have this Indigenous heritage. And it was such a wonderful thing that my family really celebrated. But as I wrote this book, that really came out in this book too, this sort of in between nature. And I ended up talking to other people who maybe their grandparents were immigrants or their parents were, but they don't speak the language that their family is from, and that aspect of it really became more vulnerable than I was comfortable with. And yet, this is the book that really resonated with people. And I just finally decided that this is just true for me. And I will never be as good as they say, but I will never be as bad either. And so I'm just going to move forward and put this out into the world because this is my dream. This is what I've worked toward for all of these years. And in doing so, I really happened to write about the one thing that um, I was worried would be kind of a talking point. And the truth is, it kind of is. I say that I'm Indigenous by birth. My heritage is Indigenous. I've met my birth family. I am not a citizen of a specific nation. And so I do not say that I'm Native American because I want there to be no misrepresentation and no misunderstanding of that, of what my experience is. And I find that things like that are nuanced are not always things that people understand on a surface level, because of course they don't. You know, that takes some a little bit of investigation or curiosity and asking those questions. So I like to just share that information with everyone up front, because that's the truth of this book, what's behind my story and my part of that. And it gets into these larger questions that I'm fascinated by: identity and belonging, who gets to decide. And I think a lot of people feel that they're kind of caught between two or more worlds, and maybe feel like I have felt, which is I'm not enough in some cases, maybe I'm too much in others. And in the end, really, you are who you are, and that in itself is enough.
Thank you. That was awesome.
That was so beautiful. Can we just take a beat to like process all these beautiful quotes that I'm taking from you? Like, I'm seeing spa auditions, more dog. Was the one that Danny wrote in there. I will never be as good as they say, but I will never be as bad either. Really, really inspiring stuff. I love that. We have like a minute or two left if anyone else wants to squeeze in a question, but I do want to be mindful of Laurie's time. Does anyone have a last, or if there's a last tip that you want to, mic drop for us, Laurie?
Can I just piggyback on Selena's great question too, just because I know in that in what you're saying about your response, both in the submissions to editorial remarks and so on, a lot of people are coming in and taking workshops too. And what advice you would give to students who might feel nervous about that particular setting, where you're getting feedback on that you can't anticipate, and just practical tools that you've developed over the years. I'm sure that you developed in your reporting too.
Oh, yes, that's a great question. One of the things that I always encourage people to look for, especially when they're receiving critique, is to look for patterns rather than individual commentary, is to look for the patterns as a whole, because I feel like that really gives you really this broader picture of where things just aren't making sense, or sitting right, or whatever the case may be with that. It kind of helps you identify areas that need work. And I found over the years that that really is pretty accurate to look for those patterns. And that's one of the reasons these workshops or these classes have been so helpful, because it's a healthy critique environment with people who are at a similar skill level, that you can trust that you're all in it together. And really, if you're all critiquing, you're all equally vulnerable in that. And I found that that process was really enjoyable for me as a reader. And I fell in love with some fantastic writing by my cohorts that I still think about all the time. There are stories I read in my classes that I think about almost every day. And I need you to not give up. There's so much of the story that shines in the editing of it. And you can really take something with this seed of something exceptional and make it entirely exceptional in the editing. And that is sometimes a real slog. It's kind of hard to get yourself back in there and really go through it with a fine-tooth comb again and again. But it's worth it.
Fantastic. I love it. Patterns. I'll pass that along. Thank you so much, Laurie. Congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, and I have one little piece of news that no one else knows yet except my family. My debut novel is now a USA Today bestseller.
I think we should all unmute and cheer for this, because that is
Oh,
It's fantastic. Excellent.
thank you.
that's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Congratulations.
Thank
So
you.
much to celebrate. And I really feel like there's an extra special something when a fellow peer makes it. You know, it's like our
Yes.
own community is our own little family. And it's like when I went to, let me tell you, I went to Trident Bookstore on Newbury Street in Boston, and I saw this beautiful book next to like some of the most like popular other books, and I was like, wait, is that I was like Santa, like I had a moment. It was amazing. And also
Yes.
the cover, a moment from the cover, so captivating, so beautiful. Love the title. Everything about it is just, I'm not surprised that you have gotten that amazing news. So
Oh, thank you. I found out yesterday. And well, I was with my little grandson yesterday. We'd just gone on a nature walk, and my editor called and said, you're on this list. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I got off the phone and I told him. He was like, yay, can you make me some chocolate milk? Like, it's so grounding. I love it. But I didn't tell anyone else because I wanted to tell all of you first, because I really feel like we are all in it together, right? So let's pull each other up. Let's celebrate together. Let's do this together.
okay, now I'm gonna cry. Good thing we're at the end.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you're so right. Honestly, it really is. I even my little manuscript is nowhere near done, but it wouldn't be anywhere near what it is without all the feedback I got from classmates, professors, loved ones, everyone. It really is. People say that writing is a lonely endeavor, and it is, but if you join these types of communities, it really makes it teamwork, and it's just that much more exciting to cry and celebrate and go through ups and downs. So thank you for letting us be a part of your journey and for coming here and sharing us so much VIP, spilling the tea with us,
That's right.
if you will. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It has been a joy to share this with you. I'm so appreciative to all of you, and I hope that we stay in touch. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you. And everyone go grab your copy at the nearest bookstore. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.